Hello, YouTube and Covalence students. We're continuing this Nightmare of an Express series. Nightmare as in I can't stop making videos for it. It's my personal nightmare, not that the content is a nightmare. It's actually a dream content. What can I say? We built something and deployed it. That is exactly what you should be doing as a junior developer or even a senior developer, right? Build things and get it out there. So, we're going to continue this little series here because it's never going to stop, evidently, is a good idea in how to organize your projects. I talk about this in some other Express series I have on here, but again, this one's more focused on the absolute newbie and beginner. This is kind of like supplementary material for students that have gone through their back end journey and they kind of want to make sure they have the fundamentals, maybe no bad habits formed, or understand some different practices and concepts to organizing a project. So we have a very simple server here that we're going to be going through in just a moment. We're going to have to keep things tidy, and keeping things tidy matters, especially when our code base starts to get as big as a blockbuster movie script. Not that this is for server-side development, but we're gonna imagine. We're trying to cook a fancy dinner in a messy kitchen. You've got pots and pans everywhere, spices are all mixed up, it's chaos. AKA anybody that's done any kind of line cook work knows it tended to be a huge mess unless you have your mise en place, and that's what good coding is without good organization, right? It's a messy, chaotic kitchen with everything out of place. You can get it done, but it feels 10 times worse than it should be. You want everything in the right place so you can jump around and not waste time hunting for that one line of code that you wrote 3 months ago. Guilty as charged. I've been there myself. It's about making life easier, really, for you and for future developers trying to come help you on a project should it grow to that scale. So anyone else hopping into the project, and even you want to make sure the code itself kind of grows and adapts, right? A clean setup means less headache, more efficient teamwork, and a smoother ride for when things start scaling up, which is why we're going to talk a little bit about what's called the MVC pattern. The MVC pattern stands for Model View Controller. It's a classic way to keep your code organized and playing nice and orderly, right? So Model View Controller, MVC. You will see that a lot, and again, it's a great thing to add to your list of buzzwords hidden somewhere in your LinkedIn or resume or portfolio or something like that, because it gets you past those stupid filters and those AI filters now, so you can get yourself into that first job and pass all that crap out of the way. Talk to your interviewer, charm them, wow them, show them these projects, and you're good to go. So think of it like splitting up a band into vocals, drums, and guitar. That's what our model view controller is going to be. Instead of having one guy that has like the cymbals attached to his knees, the accordion here, the harmonica attached to his mouth, maybe some other ridiculous instruments on him. I don't know here. The point is you split those up into different players of the band instead of one person trying to be the one-man band, right? Everyone's got a part to play in the big concert, and that's what this is going to be here in our server-side development. So normally we do have something called, I'll do them in order actually now I think about it. Model View Controller, MVC. The model is like your brainiac. It handles all the data and the rules of the game. Think of it as your behind the scenes crew, meaning all the stuff the audience never sees but totally depends on. The view is the part that you want to show off. It's what your users see and interact with. It's in a full stack app, it's all the shiny buttons and menus, but in an API, well, it's less about flashy graphics and more about data presentation like JSON. And then there's the controller, the conductor of the orchestra. I don't know what time signature this is. I think it's only one hand anyway. Taking requests and telling the model and view what to do next. So the controller is like, okay, I got a request for this page. You there. Hey, view, homepage view. Go over there and check that out. They want this data structure. Send that JSON structure off as a model, etc., etc. So the controller is what orchestrates the whole thing. So model is the brainiac. The view is what you see, or the user sees, or the data structure they see, and the controller is the conductor that conducts all that stuff. And that's how it's going to be going down here. So we're not going to be doing the visual part of a traditional view in our API. We're going to be still using that MVC thinking. It's about clarity, keeping your server code neat, and knowing where everything should go as we build more complex features into this crazy app that's never going to stop haunting me. We're not doing the view here because we're keeping this kind of like a headless REST API. That means that the whole thing will be requests and responses about JSON data and not necessarily sending views or building an HTML page that we send as a response to these requests and middlewares we have coming in here, right? That is a totally standard way to do things for a long time. But in this case, we're going to be skipping the view part in the sense that we won't be building or templating pages, even though you can look into that. This is going to be more about just making sure we have our JSON data structures kind of figured out as our views. Like again, the view of the character endpoint would be seeing the JSON structure of the character that we've been building in this little app here, right? So we're going to be building a new directory structure, and we're going to have 3 different folders called routes, middlewares, and controllers. So we're going to this whole thing building up. We got a pile of boxes on the floor, so we're going to start getting some things sorted out, sorted by genre, artist mood. If we had like a bunch of boxes of vinyl records that we have to organize on a shelf, that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be building a little organizational love to our project. So we're going to think of routes as our folder where, all the paths of our app can take. So basically, the routes that we have as of right now are character. We have a get route for character, a post for level up, and a delete for level down. When this application doesn't have a lot going on at the moment, but nevertheless, these are the 3 main paths, and anything else pathwise we can take in the future, or path and method rather. That's where our routes are going to do. They're going to be the different paths our app can take. And back to our, if we had like a collection of vinyl records we're trying to organize, it's how we're going to lead to different tunes, or in our case, different bits of functionality. Then we need a spot for our middlewares. And our middlewares, like the comment already showed us, is some of these right here. Now, some middlewares like the Express static, URL encoded, and Express.js, any future middlewares we add will probably be on the server side list right here. But the more we begin to add custom functionality, for example, parameter and request body validation, or even authentication and things like that, or even our custom logging middleware right there, we can move to a middlewares folder. They're going to be like sound checks or warm-ups before a live gig. They make sure everything's set before the main act, which is our routes and our controllers. They can log info, handle errors, we're going to code that one today, or check if someone's got some kind of VIP backstage pass, which is our authentication middleware that if this series gets that far, I'll be surprised myself. Then we're going to have the controllers, right? And the controllers are what I have basically collapsed here in my VS Code window with these little things with the drop down arrows. Basically, it is the guts of these routes that we discussed already. These are the real rock stars. They take the requests from our routes, hit up the models for data, so we can kind of think of our character service as a model, and decide how to respond, right? It's going to be their job to keep things running smoothly. So wherever we write any logic that eventually sends a response, that is our controller. So by breaking up our code into those directories, we're going to keep things running, looking sharp, and running efficiently. So it's going to be what we're going to be doing in this little video series. So I guess let's go ahead and get underway. I just realized I am sharing the wrong window because I need to show y'all my monitor and not just VS Code. So there's VS Code. We can go back to the app and the repo. Okay, and Hopscotch. So make sure you have your Hopscotch stuff open. These videos have been kind of sporadically coming out in this series, so some of y'all might need to pause and get the appropriate repository opened up. If you want the latest repository, it should be linked in the description down below. Grab hopscotch.io or whatever API testing tool you want to use, such as Postman or whatever. Remember, I have CI/CD from the last video or two, so basically every time I integrate something and push it to my main branch, it should auto-redeploy as well. We won't see anything different on the front end other than our server being written better, and y'all, again, trying to focus on server as the point of this playlist for some clear understanding of how you might start organizing a project as it begins to scale up like this. So first thing I'm going to do is in my server folder, I'm going to make a new folder. We're going to call it middlewares. Because in my middlewares, like I said, we're going to be writing out, or we're going to be at the very least taking this little guy and moving it out and writing a new one today as well. So let's go ahead and write a new file in our middlewares folder. We're going to call this log middleware.js. That's kind of an on-the-nose name, but it works, even though it's in a middlewares folder. So if you saw /middleware/log, that's fine, but the file name itself, I'm going to make sure it's as meaningful as possible as well. I'm not going to do any kind of crazy index tricks in this video, as in like index file tricks for re-exports and whatnot. We're going to keep it as straightforward as possible. So how do we take this from our server and make it a middleware? So look at what we're looking at here. The app use part is how we can tell our server that it's going to be using a middleware. But how do we actually take this and convert it to a middleware? Where it's just a function that has 3 particular parameters, and it runs some code, and that's all it does, which means that's all we really need to focus on. It's the function that does something with the request response in the next function. So if I copy the guts of the app use and paste it into my log middleware, all we really need to do is if we're going to be using arrow functions especially, is we can take this anonymous function currently, and we can assign it to something like, I don't know, the name of the file, log middleware, and assign it to this variable. And guess what? You have made your own standalone middleware. It was easy as that, right? All it is a function that intercepts request, response, and next, and we store it into a variable as a function, and we're good to go if you decide to go with this function, or if this arrow function syntax right here. And that's it. It's going to do the same thing, console log the request URL, and go to the next step after it's done doing its job. Then, just like we learned over in our character service.js, remember I told y'all that we use the node.js moduling system right here. We're going to be using that as well to make sure we can export this out. We'll say module.exports equals log middleware, and voila, we now have our log middleware good to go. So from there, we need to actually bring it into our application, right? Meaning our app.js, not our app.js, that's the front end. Why did the front end open up all of a sudden? Get out of here. We don't need the index HTML either. I just need to have my server open. So back in our log middleware, there's log middleware, and I meant server.js, not app.js. I was thinking app as in the variable we call our server. So this part is now removed, so how does it get replaced? Well, we have to import it back in first. So because I decided to do a module that exports and not as an object, I just exported out log middleware itself. I should be able to call it something similar or the same thing, meaning I can say const log middleware equals a require of /middlewares/log middleware, and that should bring it on in for me. And now in my list of middlewares, all I have to do is place that function. I'm not invoking it because remember, this is a definition of what it's supposed to do when this middleware, when a request comes through it. I don't invoke it because remember, in JavaScript, functions are first class objects, meaning this will invoke what log middleware does, and whatever it returns gets placed on the app used. We don't want this to run until the appropriate time, aka when a request comes in and through this middleware, which is why we're not going to be invoking it now. We're just going to be placing the definition of what it does here. So we've made a small change. We might as well test a small change. So make sure our nodemon project, our nodemon script npm run dev is up and running. We should be good to go. I don't think it's going to have an issue here. I don't know why I had this cannot read properties. I think, because I copied and pasted it in. I don't think it knew what rec was. So we'll see. I mean, it should be fine. Famous last words. Let's go ahead and go back to Hopscotch. We're going to go ahead and grab our character endpoint. This lists the character from the last time I did the video. And if I check my logs, yeah, it logged where the character, where the request was going, which was indeed to/character. So guess what? We have successfully made our own little middleware right here. Hooray! So, what is the other middleware I said we're going to be coding here? Now, because of the scale of this project, I mean, it would make sense to have just like a middlewares index file where we code all these out. But again, the whole purpose of this is how to organize your content like a pro, from beginner to pro, right? So, let's make another new file. And we're going to talk about how to do a cool error handling middleware. So, we're going to say error handling middleware.js. We're going to do the same thing, const error handling middleware equals an anonymous function like that we're going to be assigning. Now, what is not obvious right away is that you can write a custom error handling middleware in Express by simply including an additional parameter at the very beginning of the parameter list in your function. So instead of the classic rec_res next middleware, we're going to include the additional error should one be passed along. It gets added at the beginning, and then rec_res next is required. So you cannot just have an error middleware that does error rec_res because it will assume that is rec_res next. Because remember, the names of these parameters don't matter, but their order does matter. So a 4-parameter list in Express is interpreted as an error handling middleware. A 3-parameter list is always interpreted as a rec_res and next. That's why you have to be careful. And if you don't include the next keyword, believe me, I've seen students try this and they're like, hey, Luke, my middleware for error handling isn't working, but why do I have to include next if I don't use it? It's because the number of arguments is important. So these parameters are now interpreted as the rec, the res, and the next, and that's not what we mean to do. So you include that next keyword in there, even if it's not used in this middleware, and that will interpret and pass in an error should one be caught somewhere in our endpoints. So we're going to do something like this, console.error. Let's do the error stack. And then from there, we need to send a response. And remember, the response will be similar to what I send from my try catch blocks in all of my controllers. Now that we know that term. It sends a response with the set status code of typically 500. We can customize that later, and some kind of JSON message. So let's go ahead and do something similar. Set a status code of something like 500, and then I want you to send a JSON style response that sends something like error, server error, and our message will be whatever the error message is, or we can always do like a default string in case it doesn't have one, but that should be safe. What is it telling me here? Oh, classic Luke. Look, I wrote up here and I wrote error down here because I think I just mindlessly wrote error here, which is where it's supposed to be. But these two are supposed to be .message and .stack, or I could have gone up here to the parameter and changed it to error instead. But there we go. That is my lovely little middleware in action right now. And we should be good to go ahead and add it to our list of exports here. Exports, error handling middleware. There we go. And now we need to bring it into our server, and we got to give it a test as well, don't we? So this error handling middleware should handle any errors thrown to it from our other routes. So remember, I talked about this earlier in the series, that the order of our middlewares and things like that is important. So let me show you. Error handling middleware is a require to our middleware, custom written middlewares, error handling middleware file in particular. Now, we don't put it at the top because, well, we're hoping that doesn't come in with just an error right away. It's not going to go in this list of middlewares, even though that's typically where you would see middlewares. In this case, because it's an error handling middleware, we're handling any errors that happen to occur in our current 3 routes, our app get, app post, app delete for character level up, level down. Meaning, our error handling middleware should be the last thing that happens in case all 3 of these are missed or something goes wrong and in one of these routes like an error occurs, rather than having to copy and paste the exact same try catch block into all of them, which once we determine that we want to change how we handle our errors, we're going to have to go to every single controller we have to rewrite that code, which is not a good idea. We want it separated into one singular place, a single source of truth of how all errors are logged on our machines, on our servers anyway. So we're going to say app use our error handling middleware, and that should be good enough to give it a whirl. We have our error handling middleware kind of like set up like a catcher's mitt, so whatever fastball is thrown from whatever fastball request is thrown in, it gets logged where it's going. This will grab it if it's the home page. If it has the correct headers, it'll parse the body. It'll check the method and path of all 3 of these. Let's say it gets character and something goes wrong. Let's say at the very beginning of character, we're going to throw a new error that says test. That's all it's going to do. It's going to say new error test. As of right now, all this code is dimmed out because it's not going to get to it. It's going to throw an error, and this catch is going to catch it and log it that says, oops, my code sucks, my fun self-deprecating error, and display that message. Let's go give it a test. Oh, hold on. Could not send request. Oh, I have a typo? Do I have a typo I didn't notice, y'all? Get in the comments if you saw the typo. Hey, we're human here, folks. What can I say? No one's perfect. But you know, even underlined it in red for me. But you know, talking and coding is hard. Let's try that again. That's what I expected to see. Oops, my code sucks, and message test, which is what I coded it to do. The self-deprecating message and the error message itself, which happens to be the string value of test, which is what this is right here. So how do I transfer this hard-coded error handler that is repeated in all of my controllers I'm going to have, and how do I have it just kind of daisy chain this error down to my error handler instead? It is actually very, very simple, something we haven't used in our routes in the video series so far. That is our next function. We already learned about it from our log middleware in one of the first couple of videos in this little mini playlist I'm doing, this little mini lesson on server fundamentals for newbies. That log middleware is called the next function and just simply said move to the next step. We're going to be doing the same thing. So what I'll be doing in our server.js for now is changing or adding next to my controllers, to all my endpoints. Then in the catch error, rather than doing anything specific with it, I'm going to call next. And guess what? You can pass an error as the parameter in your next function. So next with no parameters means continue onwards to the next step, whether that is another middleware or the endpoint, for example. Or next with an error parameter passed to it, we'll pass it down to our error handler. So now, instead of having to write in our catch blocks the same copy and paste the same code over and over again, which is not going to scale when it's time to change how that functions, we now have a single source of truth of how all errors are handled and how they are logged in our error handling middleware. So now I'm going to pass the same through no error test, call next error, and let's see what happens. So no typos this time, okay? We're gonna go back here. This is what the old response looked like. That was the self-deprecating, and I said kind of error handling process. Now we're gonna click send this time, and check it out. There is our error message, server error, status code 500, message test, so that part still works the exact same way. And remember, we have server error as our error handling middleware's purpose. And guess what? We caught it. So this caught the error from this code here, passed it along to next error, and that passed it down to our error handling middleware. So now it works as it should. And it also did error.stack, and here's the error stack of the whole error that happened, probably where it happened, and some like debugging hints of where it probably happened somewhere in our code to give us, the developers, a chance to go find out where that problem occurred. So there you go. So now all I have to do is come down into my other two endpoints as well and simply write next and do the same thing. I'm going to copy and paste for simplicity, catch, and then instead of doing the hard-coded that, we can just do next error as such. Same thing on this one. We're simply going to add the next function as a parameter in our code right there, and then change that to be next error, and voila, we now have some very dope middleware to handle errors that is a more consistent fashion than trying to remember how we wrote each one inside of our own catch blocks. And again, you saw I only had to change 3 endpoints, 3 controllers of how they handled the error. Imagine having to change that across 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 different routes. Nah, man. Global error handler middleware is where it's at. This is something I love teaching my students first thing when they begin trying to figure out how to code their servers a bit better. So there you go. That is a cool way of doing some error handling middleware. Now, we've done middlewares. I'm going to get rid of this throw new test error here because we don't need to have that to happen anymore. We know our code works just fine. There we go. So what is next, y'all? We still have to move out our controllers and our routes into their own separate functions. So let's go ahead and maybe do our controllers directory. So I'm going to collapse these dumb folders here. Data can collapse. Middlewares were done there. You know, we should also move that character service into its own folder. That's kind of like our model. So we're going to call that services for now. And we're going to move character service into it. Now, this is dangerous, but a lot of the times VS Code will auto correct paths. Now, this project is simple enough to where VS Code probably auto corrects it without any issue, and it did. But you got always double check. Don't just rely on your IDE. Oh, this is an IDE. Don't rely on your IDE or your code editor to just figure it out auto magically. Make sure that wherever your character service code is in use, you check that require statement to make sure it's not, unfortunately, broken or it didn't detect that you moved it into its own folder. But nevertheless, that gives me even more control or organization on our server, which is what this is all about. So in our server, let's go ahead and make our controllers. And remember, our controllers were the rock stars. They're going to be the actual code that is basically ran inside of our routes, right? So this part I would define as the route, and then this part I would define as the controller, the action of the endpoint, the code that's actually going to run and do all the lifting and send the response. That is what our controller is going to be, and we can give them names and export and import them as needed. So typically you group like with like. So all 3 of these things in this application's case are all about a single character that we're leveling up, leveling down, and getting the information from, right? So that means that it would make sense to group all 3 of these controllers together. Now imagine I have a new feature that is about something else other than a character planner. I don't know what else. Let's say there's a comment section underneath the character where people can discuss and min-max builds. If I had a resource of comments, and I had 3 new routes: get all comments, add new comment, and then edit and delete comments. So like my CRUD operations, create, read, update, destroy for a comments resource. I would have a controller called comments controller or something like that, where I would group them all together. But because all 3 of these are for character information, I'm going to group them together in a singular controller. For example, you guessed it, character controller Express.js. And inside of here is where I'm going to need to be basically making functions, because remember, that's what we learned. We learned that these are just functions, right? The same way we learned about our middleware. So that's the same thing I can leverage here. Const get character from my character controller will be an async function that will have access to our request, response, and our next function. So recres objects, next function. And you guessed it, y'all. What it's going to do is simply run this code. So I'm going to cut that. That was dangerous. And I'm going to paste it here. Now, the next problem we have is our character service is not required here. So let's go ahead and require it at the top of this file to make sure it is in scope. We're going to say const character service needs to be required from, you guessed it, the service file. So up one out of controllers, into services, into character service, and we're donezo. So that gives us that import statement right there. We have get character, and we need to export that out, and we're going to do that just like I did, if you recall, from a previous video where we wrote these, the same kind of object style export here. I'm going to do the same thing for our controller. So I'm going to say module.exports this controller as an object with a property called getCharacter and a value of getCharacter, but if the key and the value are the same thing, we can shorthand it down to the following. This gives me the ability to import it as my back into my code as a controller as needed. So hold on, so we can call it character controller back in our server right here. So this is going to be changing here in just a moment, so bear with me. But we're going to call this const character controller is going to be a required to the path where we just coded controllers character controller. This character controller corresponds to this object, so we have .getCharacter as the path. So we already know that my get request. What did I cut? Hold on. Did I cut? Oh, I cut level up. Oh no, my bad, y'all. Again, get in the comments if you saw me make that goofy mistake. I cut the wrong controller. So let's cut that back. Paste it. I told you it was dangerous. Put that back into post. And let's get the get character code and cut this instead. So we're going to cut the get character code and paste it in here. Okay, so there's our get character code. As you can see, the code itself is the same. Nothing has changed. It's going to do the exact same thing our code did before and send a response or daisy chain to the next error should that be needed to be done. So we now have it isolated to its own function called getCharacter, which is a controller. So all we need to do now is, remember, that function comes from that new object called characterController.getCharacter, and that right there is a route, which means we're going to be moving that back into its own file here momentarily. But for now, what I would like to do is confirm that nothing's broken. And if I go over yonder, let's see. What happened? No such file or directory, data character JSON. Oh, I know what happened. Well, another little bug that I managed to incur is, remember, I told you don't rely on your code editor or your IDE to auto-update paths, and I totally did that. So check it out. I told it that data will be in the same place as character service, but that's no longer the case when I've moved my character service file into another directory called services. That means I have to go up one out of this directory to find the data folder to go find the character JSON file. So what do you know? Always little things, y'all. But hey, read your errors. They're there to help you. There's the character information, and guess what? Our server is now that much cleaner. So the next thing we're going to be doing is copying and pasting some more of our controller code, aka our try-catch blocks, into their own custom functions. So let's go ahead and make those next ones here. Let's go ahead and write const level up character is an async function with the request and response objects, and our next function from Express. It is going to run, correctly this time, the level up post try catch code. It should have access to the character services here, and the character service is already coded to be corresponding to the correct area, to the correct file path. Const level down character on our controller is an async function with the request and response objects and the next function, inside of which, you guessed it, take this try catch block, move it down to level down character, and we have ourselves a fantastic setup of our controllers. So anytime any kind of new code has to be added for character type stuff, you come to this file and do so. That is what's so nifty about it. That way, if we have comments and other bits of this project being built out, we now have separate files that are the single source of truth for that resource, its set of controllers and its set of routes when we get that far. So let's go ahead and change out these other two down here to now use our character controller dot level up character. And this one is our character controller dot level down character, right? So, I like having these comments here because they make them nifty. It makes it nifty for newbies to understand what's going on. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just nuke them because we now have a set of character routes on our application. So that is a very clean set of routes for how small this app is, right? They have controllers and our paths and our methods and our paths right here. So here we go. Let's go make sure that everything is working. Let's make sure we can still level up a character. Let's make sure we can still level down said character. Level down successful. Get it. Level 11. So it correctly removed one of the levels here. Let's go add a level back. Remember my body from last time? Body, JSON, Ranger. Yeah, so let's add a level of Ranger. Does it work still? Send. Level up successful. Get. Character gets successful. Levels 12. And it does indeed have Ranger as the last level. So guess what? All of my routes still work, and I've now isolated that code into a set of controllers. Believe it or not, we got one more step to do. Remember, this is MVC we're thinking of here, model view controller. The controller is going to be the rock star, right? The conductor of this whole thing. And we still need to make a set of routes. So I'm going to go into my server and now make a routes file, or directory rather. These are going to be all character-related endpoints, so I'm going to go ahead and call this something like character routes. Makes sense to me. And this way, all things character routes are in this file. If I had a comments feature of this application, there'd be a comments routes and a comments controller for all things dealing with comments. So you guessed it, this is how we're organizing it. So what this needs to do is it needs to make a new route. This is done very simply. It comes from the Express library. The Express library has its own middleware called router with a capital R that returns a router middleware that can be stacked on each other. So what this file is going to do is when we are done configuring this router, we're going to export it out. And in between here is where we define what our server already does. The methods and the paths and what controllers deal with characters. So all I need to do is I'm going to copy this for now because I've learned that cutting is a very dangerous game. We're going to paste them in here. Okay. So we need to also make sure our controllers are correctly imported here. Require up one out of routes into controllers, get the character controller. So now we have those three here. Instead of app, we're going to be writing router, lowercase r router, because that's the variable in this file that represents this router middleware. And now, anytime we keep adding more features to our character process, whether it's like subclasses or ASI and feat tracking and things like that, we now can add the route methods and paths here. Because you can imagine the bigger the project gets, having all of your routes and their controller code all written in the same place is going to get very long and tedious to work through. But now this is almost like where your networking is going to happen, where the routing is going to happen of the methods and paths. You come here to figure out what's going on. You make sure the appropriate controller is on it. And if something is 404ing, like it's not the right method or the right path, this is where you come explore that. If it's not doing functionality-wise what you think it should be doing, you head to the controller for that associated resource. So now we have a much stronger organization here, right? Again, we're trying to organize our kitchen so pots and pans and spices and utensils aren't laying around all over the place and mixed together. We now have them isolated, right? So how do we take these character routes and now add them back to our server, which will complete this little organizational breakdown I wanted to show y'all in this little video series? Well, it should be as simple as coming back yonder to our server. Hey, guess what? Character service is now totally gone. So the service is now no longer required in this particular file. I will say we'll have const character routes equals a require statement to the path of routes slash character routes. Now, instead of having to have these three written here, all I have to do is write app.use nope, not controller. What are you doing, Luke? Character routes. And you guessed it, I can now come up yonder and delete my character controller require, because now I have my main Express server, all the routes for things, characters, any custom middlewares that happen at the top of requests, logs, websites, body parsing as required. Anything that has to deal with resources can come down here. There are still more organizational techniques we can do here, but I think this is enough for this video. And then our error handling middleware is our catcher's mitt below it all, ready to catch all possible errors, which there's still more we can do with this, believe it or not. Then our server should be running, no problem. I shouldn't have broken anything, so once again, test. That works. Level down. Get the characters, level 11. Add ranger back. It sends to level 12. Can I level up again? Nope, level limit reached, so all my validation is still kind of working, which is going to be the next video, is how we can take our controllers, because right now our controllers also have some common validation that we can remove. Like, for example, the selected class stuff could be a great another middleware we can add for character middlewares that will make sure that, again, error stuff is handled properly. We can even figure out how to throw a new kind of error that will include a status code and message for ourselves, because as of right now, you would still have to throw custom errors, or return custom responses rather, in our validation code, which again, I have an error handler, global one, that should be able to handle those kinds of things. So I could choose for like a single source of truth style error handling by making a custom error that I could throw from these validators as needed. But we can also talk about that, how we move these as validators out, because this code will get kind of nasty the more we keep adding in here. So what's going to end up happening is it would make sense that we would have like validators dot level up character. So it's like another middleware, and so this is where you can begin chaining more and more middlewares. We could have like another file that will give us the ability to validate that we can level up the character and handle that problem before it gets that far. So we have some cool choices we could do for future videos. Like I said, this Nightmare series is one that will never end, because there's always more I could teach y'all and show y'all. But for now, I think this is enough. We have a pretty solid project. It doesn't change any of our routes, which means all of our front-end code should still work the exact same way. Refresh the page here. Yeah, if I level down the character a whole bunch, for example, it's down to Barbarian, level up to level 5 Barbarian. Then let's add 3 Rogue. And there you go. There's a good Throwbarian build going on right here already. Yeah, so it's working out, no problem, just fine. There's no bugs in the code as of right now, anyway. Yeah, no errors. So we're done here, which means, as always, I'm going to push it to my dev branch. Git add, git commit. Adding new server organization, git push. Okay. And then we're going to switch to the main branch, merge the dev branch, and push those. Oop, I wrote git merge dev. Lots of typos in this video. And then push all these changes to my main branch, which, please tell me this is not the one I have on Covalence. Okay, this is mine. Good. Because mine's the one that's attached to render, so we should have a auto redeploy event popping up. There it is. We now have a lovely new auto redeploy. So I tested it. That's my CI and CD part now in action. So yeah, it will have no impact on the front end of this project here, but it will have a lot of cool server organization that if I continue this series any further, y'all have learned and what you will see in any kind of frameworks like Nest or Feathers.js, if they quickly will spill up a way for you to do MVC in those frameworks instead of having to write all this out yourself. But I want you to understand how it's written at a low fundamental level, so if you happen to use those frameworks or go to a job that uses it, or like Java Spring MVC is popular here in the Southeast for some reason, you will be familiar with some of these terms and ideas and concepts and organization tactics and techniques, so you will not feel lost joining on a bigger project. And this also gives you some good-looking server code, so if a recruiter or interviewer or code mentor looks at it, they're like, not bad. So yeah, do the YouTube stuff. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe to keep this video going. Share your render links and improvements and changes if you've made any here. If you have any questions on server-side development specifically that you need me to address, as I meandered through this series thinking of cool new topics to do for each video, let me know in the comments down below. If you have interest in learning more about server-side development or client-side development or even full-stack development or going from zero to hero in React, boy howdy, we got some courses for you here at Covalence. Check the description down below for a link to our community membership, where for $25 a month, you get access to our entire full stack program broken into our front end and back end course. Again, combined together is our full stack program that's hundreds of hours of content and dozens of labs that push you to make things like this over and over and over again. And my React course, which shows you everything about from zero to hero in React, as well as any future courses, which I'm currently working on, will be added with no extra charge into your community membership. You also get access to our Discord, so you have some supportive, fun mentors in your coding journey in this MERN stack that we all seem to be gravitating around. So yeah, if you have anything else, again, get in the comments down below, like the video, do the YouTube stuff, and I'll see y'all in the next video.